Okay, so next we have Jess Fletcher talking about the podcast pedagogy.
Thank you very much. Hi everybody, I'm Jess, I'm from Swansea University, and I'm going to be telling you a little bit today about a podcast assignment that I've been using to assess communication skills in some of our science students. So the first thing was, why did I set up a podcast assignment in the first place? So look in any of the kind of, whether it be QAA, if that still applies to you, whether it be the British Pharmacological Society curriculum, whether it be if you teach medical students, the General Medical Council, they all have defined sections saying that graduates need to be able to communicate in a variety of formats to a variety of different audiences. And what I found when I looked at our degree program was we do that really well with regards to certain types of communication and to certain audiences, but we weren't doing it so well more broadly. And so a podcast was kind of a new novel assignment to help sort of challenge students in ways they weren't being already challenged in the course. It's adaptable. So if you look in the literature, it's been used mainly sort of instructor-generated podcasts have been used in a wide variety of disciplines, from music to sports science to chemistry, all different kinds of things. There's less examples of podcasts being used as an assessment, and even less examples of podcasts being used as a summative assessment with a well-defined marking criteria for how we actually approach marking these. It's creative, so in terms of it's different for the students to engage with, but you can also transition a variety of assessment types into a podcast. So if you look in the literature, there's reflections, there's case discussions, there's interviews, and the example I'll talk about today is more of a kind of a journal club type assignment with a little bit of a difference to the traditional journal club. It's novel, so as one of our students' feedback comment just later said, it was different to anything they'd done in the degree so far, and they really appreciated being challenged by something new and different. I put fun question mark, and I'm glad the previous speakers spoke about student enjoyment of things that we're trying out, because that was one of the challenging things I found in this, with particular regards to the group work aspect. So I'll touch on that more later. But as a member of staff, a podcast is actually, I'll probably never say marking is fun, but it's more fun to mark than perhaps more traditional assignments, especially when you allow students to express their creativity and really put their personality into an assignment, which you might not see in a scientific essay, for example. So the module that I deliver this assessment in is a second-year module, Communicating Medical Sciences, which is taken by students on our Applied Medical Sciences, Medical Pharmacology, and Population Health and Medical Sciences programs. It's compulsory for those students, so I have about 170 students, 170, 180 to contend with on that module, so it's quite a challenge. The podcast assignment is worth 30% of the module, and it is a group work-based assignment. And as I said, it's more of a journal club style in that it's based on an assigned scientific paper. So we have two main challenges to the students here in terms of sort of academic skills. It's a new type of assessment, and it's also the first time they're being introduced to scientific papers. I've argued for many years they should be introduced in year one, but I haven't won that argument yet. So this is the first time in my module, which takes place in semester one of year two, that they're introduced to scientific papers. And they're asked to create a podcast where they explain the story of that research. It's not a formal podcast, it's more about expressing what they found interesting about that research, what big questions was answering, how is that research applicable in a wider sense. So it's aimed at an informed but non-specialist kind of audience. And I wanted to do a podcast assessment because, as I said, it's a module about communication, so I wanted to do something a little bit more innovative. It challenges them in different ways. So critical thinking, they really have to read, quite a long research paper and try and pull out what the key information they want to convey is. So they really have to have a deep understanding and then select the information that they think is most relevant to convey, to tell the story. It's hopefully improving their communication skills beyond just the kind of oral presentations with slides they might have done before. They're working in groups, whether they like it or not. So hopefully that is fostering some kind of collaborative learning, This is the first time they've been challenged to read a scientific paper. So as I say to them, 5 heads are better than 1. You've got slightly different backgrounds depending on the degree programs you're on. So use that shared kind of knowledge to try and work your way through this paper to gain an understanding of it. As I said, it promotes a deeper engagement with the topics. It's very, very obvious if the students don't understand what they're actually talking about. I challenge them to use creative language, so analogies, to explain some of the concepts in the paper. And they really have to understand the concepts they're explaining to be able to explain them in a creative way. And because they can record it and re-record it and re-record it as many times as they wish before submission, hopefully that promotes kind of reflection on their performance to help refine their performance before they submit. And just to give you an idea of the assessment timeline, it basically runs over 3 weeks with a week at the beginning that is just for them to connect with their group members. So week 1, I put them randomly in groups, which as a student said to me this year, isn't reflective of real life to be randomly assigned into groups. The student wants to be a doctor, so I did have to break the bad news to them that it is quite reflective of real life. In week 2, they're just tasked with reading and understanding the paper. In week 3, they're scripting the podcast, and in week 4, they record and submit. So that's a kind of time scale I recommend. Whether they stick to that or not is kind of up to them. But as those kind of weeks are going by, I've run workshops about how to read a scientific paper. I have a podcast workshop, and I also provide previous student examples so they can see the kind of level that we're looking for. And this year, I'm providing more guidance about group work, and I'll explain the reasons for that in a couple of slides. In terms of how I assess the podcast, because it is a communication-based module, I basically split it 50-50. So 50% is a kind of organization and delivery, how have they adapted their communication for the format of the podcast. The other 50% is how well they have conveyed their understanding of the paper, how well have they pulled out relevant points from the paper, how well have they connected up methods with a particular result, with a particular outcome, and kind of told the whole story coherently. I will stress that I'm not looking for professionally produced podcasts. So with Zoom, they can all get together on a Zoom, click record, download an audio file. That's the extent of kind of the technology requirements. If they want to go away and edit, add sound effects, add music, they can. But I stress that they don't get extra marks for that, because I appreciate many of our students don't have those technical skills. And some of them will do that, even though they're fully aware that it won't actually increase their mark. They do have a time limit, which they find very challenging to turn an entire paper into a 5-minute podcast. They do submit a script so that we can do plagiarism checking on that. I do have a full marking rubric, but I don't want to bore you by putting that on the screen here. So if anybody does want a copy of that, I'm more than happy to share that with you. And I've been using that for a number of years now, and it seems to work quite well in terms of consistency between markers and giving students sort of relevant feedback. Myself and one of my colleagues, Dr. Adam Turner, we did do a very light touch survey. We haven't done a lot of in-depth research on the students' sort of feelings about the podcast assessment yet. We did this survey, obviously, during COVID. We tried to make it very, very light touch in the hopes that more students would click the link in the email to actually fill out the survey. We got a relatively low response rate, unfortunately, but from the responses we did get, there is some positive messages to take away with regards to how students are actually finding the assignment and what they're actually getting out of it. So I won't read all of those out, but it does seem that they are taking away some of the things that we want them to take away from this assignment, at least from their own kind of self-reflection of the assignment. And we've had some really positive feedback comments as well, both in the final end of module feedback and also through this survey. I won't read all these out, but highlighting things like, even though we forced them to work as a team, they eventually did reflect on that quite positively and really appreciated the challenge of that. They liked that it challenged them in a creative way, which perhaps other assignments hadn't in the past. They liked that it was unique, and they could really see how it was improving their communication skills. I swear I didn't pay somebody to write this one, because this is a really fantastic feedback comment to get, the kind of insight and reflection they had in terms of developing emotional intelligence and leadership skills and things that anticipate they get out of the assignment, but fantastically they did. Now you see there was a gap here. I did ask more questions, and this is where things need a little bit more focus and work. So unfortunately, only about half of the group found of the cohort that responded to the survey found the group nature of the assignment valuable, and that seemed to really impact their enjoyment. As I said, this survey was done when they completed it during COVID, and I mean, unless you have a better crystal ball than me, I didn't quite foresee just how bad their interpersonal communication would get during COVID. No cameras on, no mics on, they didn't know each other, so they certainly didn't really know how to engage with each other when we put them in groups for an assignment. And that was reflected in the feedback as well. They liked the premise of the assignment, but they really don't like feeling like students in the group are getting marks for work that they've done. So clearly I need to look more at how we're actually supporting group work and, you know, how we're kind of managing some of the additional challenges that have come out from the past couple of years in terms of interpersonal communication and those kind of relationships that students are building that they need to actually work in groups. So previously in the module, in order to support group work, I set them up with private discussion boards on the VLE that only students in that group could access, with the intention they would use that to kind of communicate and collaborate. Most students exchanged contact information and immediately went to something like WhatsApp, and I never saw anything else on those discussion boards again. So I'm trying to encourage them to use the discussion boards a little bit more so I can have maybe a little bit more oversight if there are issues that come up, so I can see what's actually happened with the groups. They were able to invoke me if they wanted to, if they're having challenges engaging with a particular member of the group. What I've actually been doing over the past year is myself and another colleague who works on the module with me, Dr. Claire Price, is that we got some funding from our employability sort of department, and we've employed 2 student interns to kind of look at the module with us, look at this assignment, look at group work, and I set them the task of how do we do this better. So they've gone away, they've looked at the literature, they've reflected on their own experience, both of these students did the module, and they've come back to me with a whole range of different resources that I'm now going to implement in the module that hopefully will help improve students' experience. So things like a light touch progress tracker, description of kind of group roles to try and get them to work better as a group, not just divvy up the different, you know, parts of the podcast and then smash it all together at the end. They're also going to share some of their tips. So one of the students, Nathan, he's just recorded some slides where he shares samples of his assignment he did, and he explains how they approached it, how he's reflected on the feedback, how we do things differently. Florence, the other student, she's just graduated now, and she was offered a job in medical writing, and in the interview they were really, really interested in this module. And I swear again, they were paid as interns, but I didn't pay her to put this slide in. She said it's the most important module you'll do in your degree. So, you know, having that kind of student voice, sharing their kind of experience, because I have to accept I'm getting older and I don't relate to students as well as I once did. So having current students, you know, sort of share their insight into that has been really, really valuable. So that's about it. Hopefully I didn't run too far over the 10 minutes. But yeah, if anybody has any questions, with my Twitter handle there as well, and it shows your age if you understand the reference in my Twitter handle. But yeah, I'd happily take any questions you might have.
Let's just pick up with the question on Padlet here. Have you had any issues with students or groups not having access to suitable recording equipment, however basic?
Only once, and I loaned a dictaphone from our library services, but it came in this massive briefcase box with all these different bits and bobs and wires. I think in the end the students didn't actually use it. So I've had no other issues, you know, and hundreds of students have actually done this assignment by now. And, you know, because most smartphones, most computers, laptops have inbuilt microphones, and all it needs these days is Zoom, there's really been no kind of technology access issues.
And another question here, have you considered the possibility of solving the problem of different engagement by using software that allows students to grade each other in terms of the quality of the group work, which can be used as a component of final individual mark? part of the software called iPackage?
I haven't gone down the route of any kind of peer evaluation for this assignment. I've done it for assignments in the past that were based in first year, and the students got along very well with that because they knew the marks didn't count as much. For second year students, these students in particular, I'm not sure how well they would take to that. I've also found that there's been challenges sometimes whereby students have been engaging, they have been contributing work, and then other students in the group say it's the quality of what they've produced they're not happy with. And given that the groups can be mixed ability, the intention there is they'll help improve each other's work, not say, I don't want this person to get the mark because it's not as good as if I'd done it myself. So I think that's an interesting thing to maybe look into, but the practicalities of how I do that and make sure the students are doing that appropriately, I think it'll be quite a big challenge.
That's great. I'm just conscious of time, Gordon, on this one.
Just one. I love these types of assessment. We've been doing video type things. And we've had all the same problems with group assessment. But with this in particular, what's the issues with accessibility? Students who have hearing issues and being able to do the assignment or take part in the assignment.
So I haven't had any students with any hearing impairments yet, so that's not a challenge that I've faced yet. What is on my radar for this coming academic year is, in terms of group work and the fact it's a communication-based module, is we have quite a few neurodivergent students. And especially when we're thinking about improving the interpersonal communication, I think that's going to be a challenge for those students, which is something I'm going to have to work, I think, quite closely with them on to make sure they themselves and the groups they're working with.
Random groups or?
Random groups, but in some of the students' sort of inclusivity support pro formas, neurodivergent students can select to work with students they're more familiar with. So I'll be having a discussion with those students. Do they want that adjustment? Who do they want to work with? If there's other people in the group, making sure that they're all working in a cohesive way that supports everyone's own approach to working and everyone's way of thinking.
Jess, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Presentation.